Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 384 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Doug Casebeer. Throughout his long career in ceramics, he has been a functional potter who has also been a teacher and ceramic consultant for the United Nations. For 34 years, he served in a variety of roles at the Anderson Ranch Art Center, helping to build the ceramic program into one of the most dynamic centers for learning in the United States. In our interview, we talk about establishing a ceramic factory for the United Nations in Jamaica in the early 1980s, as well as why it's important for artists to stay curious in their art practice. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to do today's Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of the Canon River Clay Tour. That is going to be happening August the 21st and 22nd. This is a free self-guided tour featuring 18 clay artists in the Northfield, Minnesota area. You can find out more about the artists that are participating by going to CanonRiverClayTour.com. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Actually, I thought we would start talking about Jamaica. You've had a long-standing relationship with the country as well as the potters in the country. So I thought we would just start by you talking about how you got involved with Jamaica itself.
You know, my involvement in Jamaica now is going on since probably the early 80s. 1982, I actually took a position in Jamaica working for the government of Jamaica under the Ministry of Culture and Education, which was supervised by the Prime Minister at that time, Edward Seaga. And then my employer was the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And I got to think that when I often talk about this experience and career path and how people make choices based on what's in their best interest, you know, it's kind of like careful what you think you want because it might not be the thing you need in your life at that moment. And so coming out of graduate school at Alfred in the late 70s, early 80s, I graduated in 82, there weren't a lot of jobs. In fact, there were very few jobs out there that were qualified positions. And so I tell the story of sending out 18 job applications and quickly getting 18 job rejections back in the mail. And feeling pretty down on myself that I had spent all this time and effort and resources into my education and wanting to teach and be a teacher. You know, I think that one of the things that we all share in our field is this sort of an uncanny instinct of wanting to share what we know and our experiences. Certainly you've had that overseas experience as well. And you know that when your values and your ideals and your morals are challenged in a way that's so uncomfortable, you begin to understand who you are and what kind of voice you want to have as an artist. So with that in mind, not having a job to go to and school loans to pay and so forth, and newly married and all those kind of things, I pulled down a job placement application that had come over a fax machine at that time at Alfred University. Was a posting for a ceramics technician in the country of Jamaica through the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. The posting was put forward by a Alfred graduate of 1951, and I quickly realized that Alfred graduate in 1951 was the same class that Val Cushing graduated in, who was my graduate advisor. So I said to Val, I pulled it down. I said to Val, I need a job. I mean, I really need I need to do something with my life here. And within 2 weeks of graduation and filling out a lot of forms and applications and things like that, and somehow passing an FBI screening, I was in Jamaica, Kingston, working in a pottery factory. And my position was to come in and develop materials, processes, and products that are indigenous to the country. In other words, there was no importing of materials. I had to build kilns, develop products. And I was given 48 people and 10,000 square feet in 6 months to have a product line in the stores. Growing up in rural Kansas and kind of around farming communities and so forth, we consider ourselves builders and innovators and tinkers and so forth. So I wasn't too, I guess, afraid of the fact that I couldn't figure out how to do this. I certainly didn't have the knowledge, but I didn't say no. I just took it on full force. I realized that, and there's a little bit of a sidebar segue in here that's an interesting connection. As I was leaving Alfred, I applied for a Fulbright grant and was awarded a Fulbright grant actually to go study. And my sponsor was Michael Cardew. And I was going to spend 2 years with Michael Cardew. Unfortunately, that winter, then I was supposed to go and work with him, he passed away. And so my choices began to get very narrow. And I'm not one that's particularly religious in life, but I do believe, and I think you have a sense of this as well, that there's some divine interventions and things that happen along the way that are meant to be. And one of those was that after a year of working in Jamaica and struggling trying to figure out local clay bodies and glazes and making your own frits and building your own kilns and all that kind of stuff, I wasn't having a whole lot of success. And so my wife, Susan, said, well, why don't you just look at the globe, give it a spin, and see who else on the planet was making pots in a similar latitude that may have had the similar conditions under which you were working. And so when I put my finger on Kingston, Jamaica, and spun the globe, I got to Abuja, Nigeria. You know why that's important?
Sure.
So I instantly realized that Michael Cardew was going to teach me everything he did or knew through pioneer pottery, because we were at the same location, just on a different continent. And so he became a mentor of mine vicariously, posthumously after he was gone. And everything in that book I used to develop that ceramics program in Kingston, Jamaica. And within a year, we were up and running. And the whole idea of the project was really to develop technologies, resources, materials, and skills, product development that then could be divested and privatized to the local community and create jobs, and then create jobs that would support each other. Like one component would be clay making, one might be the glaze making, one might be the throwing part. And so that they would have to work together to have success. So my project was a terminal project of 3 years. After a year of up and running, we were able to, and this will throw you a little bit, process, produce, and fire 2,000 pounds of pottery a day.
Wow.
We would rest on Sunday and start all over again. So of the 48 people working in the factory, there was probably another 100 in the field gathering raw materials. Jamaica had several high fire materials and a lot of low fire clays. They actually had porphyry granite we ground out for feldspar. They had stoneware clays. And I learned all of this and how to make this work through pioneer pottery, through Michael Cardew's book. So it was really kind of an amazing thing. And to understand, to get to the point where I was understanding, I would read it at night, and then Susan would read it during the day and then test me at night to make sure I was getting all the nuances. So it did become a partnership between she and I working through this project. After the 3 years of up and running and really producing pots for domestic consumption, Jamaica had gone through many, many years of civil unrest and was really trying to restart the tourist industry. Well, you can't do that unless you have dishes for the hotels and the restaurants and so forth, and souvenirs and gift stores. And so that's what we did, is we supplied those industries and became the producer or the supplier of the stuff you needed to run those kind of industries. And then after 3 years, it was really clear that it had its own legs and momentum, and we began to privatize aspects of it. Different parts of it, the hand building, the slip casting, the throwing, the glaze making, the clay gathering, all that went into different private hands. But then they had to create a cooperative in order for everybody to work together. Now, in the world of successful business models, the United Nations wasn't so concerned about 100% success. They were really just concerned about how many lives you could touch that then would trickle down and touch other lives and create positive energy within the community. So clay became this thing that created a conversation around the farmers, around the potters, around the ones providing the fuel. And they all had to work together in order to create this sustainable business or industry. And to this day, actually, there are a number of potters that are still almost 35 years later working under that model and using that model to create a livelihood. I guess one of the main reasons why I'm still involved in Jamaica, and I feel obligated on a very personal level, as a young adult, I felt I learned a lot of really tough, hard lessons that have served me in my life and have guided me on my path of service to the field and education. And those lessons were taught to me by individuals who, for the most part, could not read or write and grew up in poverty. And to be around individuals that could teach me life lessons that now I still use as a teacher and encourage people in their lives to have sense of meaning or sense of purpose in their life, I'm grateful. And I feel like I have a sense or a need to repatriate that gift that I was given. And so when David Pinto came along a number of years ago and said, hey, I'm coming back from Japan, I'm going to Jamaica, do you want to be part of setting up a workshop and program and developing a pilot project? And it didn't take me long to say yes to that one. And so 2 years ago, we celebrated 25 years of running workshops and doing outreach in the rural districts of the northern part of the island, specifically the parish of Chirlani. So we work with school children, we work with school art teachers, and the whole idea that you can get people who don't normally talk to each other on a daily basis to come together over a clay activity and have fun and laugh and enjoy their company and their companionship. And then when they're back out on the road, that they have a sense of respect for each other through this common material we call clay. And so that had a whole lot of interest to me, as well as sharing those opportunities with, of course, workshop participants, individuals that would want to come and have that sense of experience where we're there in common bond to learn as well as to share and to absorb. That has held my interest for a long time. I feel fortunate that those gifts have come into my life in a real practical way. And I got to think that, in 1982, I wasn't ready to teach because I did not have the skills, let alone the life skills, to be able to mentor young students who would potentially only be maybe 7 or 8 years younger than me. And so I know I needed in my life a lot more life experience to put it all into perspective. And that has honed the way I teach.
Well, yeah, I want to back up and delve into the life skills. To say that Jamaica had political turmoil is an understatement. Like, it was, at times there were armed violence happening. And in Kingston, it was, I would imagine in 82, pretty dangerous between political factions. How did you come into that environment and learn how to manage people and not come in as a colonizer? Like, how did you come in as someone on an equal level as opposed to someone saying, I know what you should do?
Well, that's you've done your homework, man. That's interesting because Susan and I were just talking about this last night at dinner, and I have a couple of my grad students here, and we're talking about how you gather those experiences in life to form a sense of voice that's who you are, what you want to speak about in your life. And I said, I clearly remember the drive from the airport to my little hotel. I probably passed about 6 burning cars on the side of the road and thought, what the hell did I just get myself into? And it had only been 10 months since Bob Marley had brought the two factions together and shook hands in the National Stadium and began to mend those wounds. And I felt very fortunate in that I could be part of that healing process. To be quite honest with you, I was a white guy, and the population of Jamaica at that time, and this includes all expats and people of European descent, right? We'd call them white people or what, were 1% of the population. And when you think about the percentage of minorities in our community right now, and Black Lives Matters and all that other kind of stuff that's going on, those percentages are in the 15 to 20% of our population. I was operating in the 1%. So I saw firsthand what it looked like to be discriminated against, to not be served, to be spit on, to have rocks thrown at me. And you develop techniques to deal with that, I suppose. And one of them is patience, and one of them is humility, and the other is humor. That a lot of times that when you can relate to somebody on those levels, then they begin to understand that I'm not there to take anything, I'm there to help. Well, the neighborhood that I worked in was 1 block from Trenchtown on Spanish Town Road. In fact, one of the older ladies that worked for me was actually a babysitter for Bob Marley as he grew up. So I really felt like I stepped into something that was true, real, and unique. And to be part of a group of individuals who are actually trying to have a reasonable and sensible life in some of the worst conditions on the planet was very humbling, extremely humbling. But the fact that I would show up in this neighborhood every day at 7 o'clock and not go home till 7 o'clock, I think I earned respect from those individuals that this person is willing to put himself in harm's way to help us have a better way of life through this material called clay. I think I earned my respect that way by just showing up for them. I was showing up for myself as well. But then to be able to acknowledge that each one of them in that room had something to offer. And if we could do this together, we would have a successful outcome. I never took I took psychology 101, but because you got to do that in college to get to graduate. Never had a business class, so I didn't understand anything about running a business. But on a human level, if you show a genuine interest in somebody and helping them understand that they can do better, I think you do earn respect. And I became known as the crazy white guy that worked in Trenchtown. And in all honesty, still to this day, we'll have conversations with people who say, they'll talk about the project that I was involved in, and they'll go, are you him? Are you that crazy white guy that they still talk about that worked in Trenchtown? That set the no guns, no knife policy before they could even come in? Are you him? How in the world did you ever survive that? Well, I mean, on some level, I was very naive. I came from the middle of the country. I came from a farming community where everybody knew everybody. You left your keys in the car so you wouldn't lose them, that kind of stuff. I think just simply showing up and showing that we could do something together that could have a positive outcome and create economy within their little community, that there was a lot of respect there. Were times when I thought, when the gunfire was, out in the street, and I thought, what the hell am I doing here? It's not too safe. One of the lessons, and I clearly remember it from one of the ladies that worked with me, who was actually the babysitter for Bob Marley when he was young. I came to work one day, and in a Caribbean culture, things kind of move at their own pace. They go a little slower. And so I came into work one day and I noticed that nobody was working. Nobody. And they were on what was called a go slow, which just simply means I'm working, but I'm working slowly. So you can't really say I'm not working. I'm just working slowly. So I went in and I said to Miss Inez Brown, I said, Miss Brown, what is going on out there? And she said, look, it's really pretty simple. Until you go out there and acknowledge every one of them and say good morning, that their presence here is just as important as yours, you're not going to get anything done. And so it's one of those lessons I taught my interns right from the beginning, working at Anderson Ranch, that when you come in the studio, the very first thing you do is you go around and say good morning to everybody in the class. And then by that way, you have a conversation already started that's pleasant and respectful. Then you can deal with the issues that may be a little more difficult in the day. So I began to understand that I had a lot to learn. And these people, these really genuine people, were going to teach me these life skills that I had never learned before. So it ended up being something that has been so pivotal in my life that I teach that way. That we're going to have a level of understanding and respect, and just simply know that we're all at different levels or different places in life, but we're going to come together. We're going to have an experience that benefits us all.
This is a good segue to your time at the ranch, where you were a resident artist, and then you also have had lots of different positions over your 34 years there. But I remember one time I was talking to you about your job, and I said, oh, you're the director of something. And you're like, no, I'm a resident artist first, and then I do the rest of the stuff. And I think you were emphasizing that we're all here working in the studio together, and that's important, that there's equality between each member of the studio environment. So can you talk about setting up that residency or continuing the residency at the ranch when you got there?
The ranch, well, first of all, the ranch was a real big gift in my life, for sure. It opened up a lot of doors, got to meet a lot of really interesting people, develop connections and relationships with people such like yourself and others, and really got to work with the heroes in our field, from the Solners and the Volcuses and everybody. And I didn't see that coming. But I felt like that, and there was a number of us at that time that felt like that we were given this gift, this thing, and we could either run with it and make something great out of it, we could tread water, or we could just destroy it. And I think at that point we decided we're going to work towards greatness. We're going to try to establish something that can truly change people's lives. And taking that value from what I learned in Jamaica is that you can change people's lives. You can heal cultural wounds through an artistic activity. I think that's really where I came from. And in order to do that, we had to create a facility that had a year-round operation. So there were the summer workshop programs, there was the winter artist and residency program, and then there was the visiting artist projects that were peppered throughout the year. And so those three aspects became the kind of the cornerstone of what we did there, and was our direction, I would say, in terms of building the facilities and so forth. And, where it goes from this day forward, it will be great and it will do great things. I trust that the organization's values are intact well enough that they will carry forward and make a difference in other people's lives as well. But to bring disparate individuals together in either our workshop or a residency situation, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. And if you set the circumstances up so that it is a respectful in collegial environment, you know that there's going to then be a healthy exchange of ideas. Some of them not always so great, sometimes really great, but the idea that you can talk to each other and have a conversation with each other about your art, that was really at the core of what I was trying to achieve and why the residency program was so important. Develop a network that as you leave here, that network grows and extends beyond your experience at the ranch. You know that to be true.
Yeah.
That's really what drove me to develop the artist in residency program. I saw a need in the field. There was a void. And at that time in the early 80s, a lot of really good non-traditional art programs out there like Penland and Haystack and so forth. But there wasn't one that really embraced an extended period of time where you could bring individuals together outside of academia to begin to have those sort of real life conversations about, how do you do this? Did I make the right decision? How are we going to support each other going forward? We've got to rely on each other. Not always knowing what the outcome is, I knew that the process had to start, and trust the process, it will have results. So that's kind of the way I've led my life, actually.
And so many people came through the ranch in different forms. I was a resident. There were interns that came through there. People come back to teach. There's all these kind of different levels of interactivity. How did you set up the internship program so that it was effective? And actually, can you just describe what interns did in the summer for their workshops, and how was that an effective way to train people? Because I know a lot of people did that program. It was awesome. It was a great experience for them.
I'm really proud of that aspect of the summer workshop program. It has a number of those people are college professors. Some are actually chair of art departments around the country. I guess, with the internship program, in a way, we were there to serve students who came, who were scared to death. They had no idea why they were coming. They just knew that something had to shift in their life. And to have interns that were actually on that same path at a younger level created a empathetic relationship in the studio where everybody could understand that you can let your guard down and learn and share. When I would intentionally select interns for the summer workshop program, each one of them was different. Each one of them came from a different background. Each one of them had different ethnicity. Each one of them was a different age. It made no sense at all for me to hire 4 individuals that made spotty brown pots that came out of a wood kiln. That just was not going to create an effective learning environment where information can be shared openly. So, my youngest intern would be 21, but my oldest one was 75. And so, and that's Sister Dennis, who taught ceramics up in Minnesota for many years. I felt like that it was just as important that the interns respect each other for what they knew and what they didn't know, so that they could then create a working environment that was positive, was supportive. And they worked their asses off, no doubt about it. We would put in 70 and 80-hour weeks for 13 weeks straight. And you come out of it exhausted, but you also come out of it with so many tools in your toolbox and so much knowledge in that bucket of wisdom that you feel confident that you can move forward in applying to graduate school, teaching jobs, carrying on with your life. So a lot of that was about empowering young individuals to have confidence in themselves and to trust their instincts. And that stuff you can't teach. You can only mentor that stuff. And you mentor that stuff by being present in those individuals' lives every day. And you kind of embrace failure a little bit. Okay, I'll let somebody melt down a few kill shells, but only once. And then I'll step in and go, there's a different way to do this. We're not cleaning shelves, every Saturday all day long. So just to have mutual personal respect for each other, that you can come together and create a situation where a group of students at the end of the workshop become lifelong friends. And that has truly happened. We know that. You and I and everybody that teaches workshops know that we go in and do our gig and get out of the way, and these students become friends forever, for life, and that they support each other in their communities. And that's a wonderful feeling. That as a teacher, that's when you know that you've been successful. When you can step back and the person you've been working or mentoring with doesn't need you anymore. It's a crazy thing to say.
Yeah, when you do it so well, you become obsolete. I think you're right. Like I always think of students, the students will stand on the shoulders of the teacher and reach a new height, something either conceptually or aesthetically that was not possible.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the ranch as a specific sort of business model. Anderson Ranch is close to Aspen. It's in Snowmass, and that is economically is a weird place, because if you drive up into the hills right around the Arts Center, there's multi-million-dollar homes with celebrities and all of that. But when you came into that studio, it was still people working, doing the same thing that they do in studios all over the country. And I know for me, like as a resident, I was there on a scholarship, so there was some financial support. But how did you set up a residency or an art center that had sort of a hardworking mentality when you're really in an area that is about luxury and wealth?
It's an interesting dichotomy, for sure. I got asked that question a lot over my time in that environment. How do you deal with this? And I'm going to kind of take a couple different tacks on this. But when I was working for the United Nations after 3 years, they want you to exit your position as healthy as you were coming in. And so I spent 2 or 3 days with psychologists and administrators, and we were going through a lot of debriefing at that time. And right at the very end, the psychologist named Rudolph, I'll never forget him, he looked at me and he said, "Do you think you've made the difference in one person's life?" And I said, "Yes." And he shook my head and said, "Thank you so much." That lesson, that thing right there told me you can't save the world, right? You can try, you can have some aspirations, but it's probably for me, in the way I think about it on a grassroots level, work with one individual at a time and get that individual moving in the right direction. And the environment in which Anderson Ranch was developed and started created the success for the organization. And so I would say to some that would ask me that question, well, politics aside, if I can get somebody of wealth, of means, to turn their thinking around to support cultural empowerment through the arts activities, that's a good thing. I've done my job. If one person steps up and says, "I'll renovate your entire ceramic studio because you'll do a better job if you have a better facility," I'm going to accept that challenge. And I'm actually speaking about a very dear friend of mine, Sarah Ransford, who is now a world-class ceramic artist who understood the need of channeling her resources for the common good of creating this educational environment. And so you're not going to touch everybody, and you're not going to convince everybody that arts is good. We're part of the choir. We understand the fact that arts is very important in our culture, that art impacts change. It's about voice, and that we get out in front of issues long before anybody else gets out in front of issues, social issues. If there's just a handful of people that are willing to embrace that idea and use their resources, I'm willing to help them turn their thinking around. And so in that environment, I had access to people of resource and value that I could go to and say, look, I think you should actually consider this as a really good way to, use your resources to better community and society. When I think about it in that context, I would never, ever been able to succeed at what we did there in a different place, unless it was Carmel or,
Sure.
one of those other environments, And I also think that the community in general was very open and liberal to the arts and arts education that had been in that area and in that valley via the Music Associate and the Aspen Institute. And so intelligent people came wanting to empower change in people's lives. And so it was a unique environment for that very reason. It's like, you got to follow the money a little bit if you want to be able to make change. And certainly standing around and waiting for things to happen and come your way. No, I'm proactive. I'm going to get involved with making things happen and making positive change happen in people's lives. So in a way, I feel fortunate that the Anderson Ranch is located exactly where it is. And, and Penland's located where it's at for exactly why it's there. And Lucy Morgan and everything that she established, early on in the last century, and Haystack and Merritt and the people that developed the issues around there. So, those locations actually had resources that allowed them to be successful as well. I just kind of think that it was just like perfect timing. It's like that, I wouldn't sound particularly religious, but I do believe in that karma, and that if you get the right group of people together at the right time, sitting in the right seats on that bus, you're going to go somewhere. That's kind of how I feel about that environment and working there. That it would not have been successful probably if we were down here in Carbondale or Glenwood Springs or somewhere else. So does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, totally does. I was thinking too about the duration that you had with residents versus interns versus now teaching in Oklahoma. For years, you were in workshop settings where you would have a student for a week or maybe 2 weeks, or I guess a month at the longest. But now you're teaching in a semester-long courses. So I wanted to focus a little bit on education. Like how have you grown as a teacher having students for longer amounts of times than before when you had them for a short amount of time?
I kind of figured that question was coming. I've been thinking about that a little bit because, my very dear friends, Chris and Randy, they looked at me and go, what are you, out of your mind? You want to go back into academia? It worked for me because after over 40 years of experience in the field and not starting off in that educational model, I really felt that I had a lot to bring to the table to young artists. In a 5-week or 5-day or a 2-week workshop, you cover a lot of ground, but a lot of it is just covering a lot of ground. And when you have the opportunity to work with a young artist for 2 or 3 years, you're able to work on developing voice and content and intentionality within the work that sets up a pattern in life as a way to think about problem solving within their studio practice. And certainly there was part of that in the residency program, in that I was able to work for a year or 2 years with individuals and help them get on with their career in life. But a lot of those residents would come to me after graduate school or after working for the Peace Corps or after traveling around the world and gathering information. But what's different about working at the university level is that you are now training and working with young artists and allowing them to develop skills that answer questions that are going to be important throughout their career. How do you go back and deal with experiences in your life that affect the way you think? Is it because you grew up in a city versus the country? Is it because you went to a private school versus a public school? Or, you grew up in a large family, or you were a single child, or, and to be able to develop those aspects of intentionality in your work then leads to a development of an artistic voice. And I think that prolonged relationship with students at that age, there's a responsibility that certainly goes along with that. You want to really care and take time and make sure that you're doing the right thing. I'm not of the feeling that as a teacher you break somebody down to find out how strong they are. That's not my teaching style. Mine is to embrace what you know and figure out how to communicate and talk about the things that are important in your life. And over a period of time, you can do that. You can set up projects. In a 5-day or a two-week workshop, you really have only got about maybe 4 or 5 projects you can really focus on, and that's it. You can't go any further. And you certainly can't keep repeating that process as a way to flush out more content, more ideas within the work. After 40 years of experience, I think I've got a little bit that I can add to the soup and help younger students, not necessarily jumpstart, but get a better understanding or a level of confidence that it's okay to be an artist. It's okay to be a potter. It's okay to work with clay. If it brings you joy and happiness in life, and what you have to say you can share with others, and it helps them have empathy for both themselves and society, you're on the right track. I've enjoyed that shift of gears, and maybe in more of a selfish way, it's allowed me actually more time in my studio and in my artist practice to think about, what are my priorities? How do I want to spend the rest of my time as a maker, and not be encumbered with, a lot of administrative work. Just really be with myself and be with my work. And that lesson is a hard one to teach young students that say, well, what's the magic bullet? I get it all the time. What's that magic bullet? Or how do you get there? Or how do you get there so fast, or whatever? And I'm like, there isn't one. But if I had any advice to give you, trust yourself and trust that time will sort it out, and be patient. The two-sided coin of tenacity and patience has to work together in order for you to move forward as an artist.
I remember conversations that we had when I was a resident years ago that were essentially, you weren't telling me to be patient, you were telling me to be diligent. And to just keep working. Like, work will sort itself out, but it doesn't happen if you're not in the studio.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. And so my mentoring style has and always has been, and you know this, and everybody that's ever worked with me or around me knows that I'm generally the first one in the studio and probably the last one to leave. And that's showing up for yourself, not showing up for your teacher, not showing up for your peers, it's showing up for yourself. And so you establish those patterns in your life that I can't wait to get out into the studio. It's like, did I have breakfast? Yeah, I think I did, but it's, to be there and be present with the work and to work through your ideas. It's the whole thing about kind of thinking through making. You can drive yourself crazy thinking about all the what ifs, right? But until you actually make it, and I got to tell you where I got that value. I remember working with Paul Soldner early on at the Anderson Ranch, and as young and impetuous as I was, wanting to things hurry up and get done. And I'd say to Paul, well, what if we did this? And he would stop me and he'd say, I never, ever want to hear that word if in our conversation again. You do it and then come back and let's talk about the success or failure of what you just did. but I'm not going to talk hypothetically about what ifs in your brain, because I don't know what you don't know. And and I've kind of lived my teaching mantra that way. I don't know what you don't know. I can share with you what I know, but we have to have a relationship, and we'll build on that relationship. But if you're not working, if you're not in their studio working, if you're not making stuff, and it could be drawing, it could be writing, it could be sketching, it could be diary, it could actually be buying a round the world ticket, and then come back. So, you have to be present with your artistic practice, and there has to be rigor in that in order for you to see the potential of what you don't know. And that's really important. There's no other way to see the potential of what you don't know without working. One of my favorite quotes, and maybe you've heard me say this, was I was listening to Terry Gross on NPR many, many years ago, might be 20 years ago. And she was interviewing Mickey Hart. And Mickey Hart, one of the drummers for the Grateful Dead, who's gone on to research drumming as communication around the world. But she asked a question of him. And I remember I was in the studio making mugs, just one after another, just a whole board of mugs. And I'm pretty sure she asked him a question that she thought would stump him, and just a softball stump question. And she said, "Why do you guys, as the Grateful Dead, keep playing the same music over and over and over again?" And without hesitating, Mickey Hart said, "Because we haven't heard the thing we're searching for yet." I looked down at the mugs I was making and went, he was talking about pottery. That I was still searching for those mugs and shapes that I had not seen before. I didn't know what I didn't know. And the only way to get there was to stay busy and work. And that's a value that some people are born with, that value, but I think it's more a value that you mentor, that you actually show people that by working through a body of work, it might not be successful, but you learn so much by working through and continuing through that vein of work, that idea, that content you have. Don't give up on yourself.
Yeah, and I find students often, when they're in the middle of something good, they want to be at the end of something good. And I often just want to be like, no, you're just in the middle. Like, I can tell you're going somewhere. You just got to keep moving. Don't turn around and go back the other way, because you'll go back to the beginning. You just got to keep pushing.
Yeah, that's right. It's like I sometimes say lateral movements are okay. If you want to put some decals on that pot, go for it. Right. But if you're going to focus on porcelain pots, don't step back to terracotta until you feel more comfortable that you understand this material you're working with right now. We do that as artists. I mean, we'll test our skills in different media and materials, see whether or not our voice communicates. Mine not so great in terracotta. Yours better in terracotta than mine, right? But I've tested it. I've seen it. But it's the touch, the quality, other things that are there that become that sense of voice, become that sense of reality for you. Process is important. I wood fire a lot, right? But it's also a way for me to understand how to stay connected to the process and make decisions during the process that affect the outcome of the finished piece. That's really important value for me, where for other potters, not so much. But that's okay. Their research and their rigor comes in different ways. And there's no one way to solve this, So teaching people to be open and having an open mind as a young student is really important. Okay, here's this project. And you're going to make it out of stoneware. You're going to wood fire it. And then you're going to make it out of porcelain, and you're going to cone six it. And you're going to make it out of terracotta, and you're going to go 04. And then we're going to look at these and see, and then you're going to tell me, what is it? What are the qualities in the way you work with those materials that you like or didn't like? And then you're on the track to establishing choices, which establish voice within the content of your work. Choices are really important. sometimes you don't have any. You and I've been to China, and it's like, here's the clay. And I'm like, that's like cream cheese. That stuff, you cannot trim that stuff, Well, then they finally showed me, well, you don't trim it leather hard, you trim it bone dry with a sharp tool. And I went, oh, okay, all right. But I had to fail, and they had to laugh at me to get me to the point to understand that you're not thinking about this right. So those experiences are really important in developing choices that then affect your voice, that then identify the content and intentionality of your work. It's kind of a circle, actually.
It is. So I wanted to wrap up thinking about your stage in life now. I've known you long enough to see you shift in work, shift in life. You're splitting time between Oklahoma and Colorado. Like, you're coming to a point in life where you're, mentally and physically you can make what you want to make. But also, I think there's more pots behind you than there are in front of you. Like you're getting older. I don't know how else to say that. So can you reflect on being an artist that's aging?
Well, at this moment, let me tell you this: take care of your damn body, because it can be over in a second. And however you feel about taking care of your body, which is also your brain, your mind, whatever those things you need to do, don't wait. Just establish those things early on in life. Family is important to me. Having a healthy relationship with my wife, Susan, and my kids and my extended family is important. My friends, Chris and Randy and their wives, Nancy and Jan, we get together and we go sailing every other year for 2 weeks just to, life can't just be all about coming into the studio and getting dirty every day. Let's just say that you're right in the fact that there were more pots behind me than to come, but I hope the pots that are to come are going to be more important than the ones I've already made. And then that sense of accumulated knowledge and experience are going to be in everything I make right now. And time is precious. And so is health. And I've been learning that pretty quickly, from a broken back to 5 broken ribs. And that if you don't take care of your body, you ain't going to have a career. You will not do what Warren did and be able to work into your 90s and make beautiful and wonderful pots. I had a visit yesterday from a very important contemporary sculptor who lives just down the road a little bit. And you know him because he lives here, James Searles. And he came by because he knew I wasn't feeling well, and we sat and chatted a little bit yesterday. But about 5 years ago, I had a little visit with him in his studio. And sometimes, little bits of wisdoms come out in chunks and so forth, and you're not real sure whether things are meaningful or not. He said to me one time, we were sitting there talking in his studio, and he just looked at me and said, "How old are you?" And I went, "Well, that's not an art question." I said, "Well, I'm 60. I'm 65 now." And he said, I'm 60. James, without even thinking about it, he said, "At best," and I mean at best, "you've got 20 years of good making in you. How do you want to spend it? And if you don't know what that is right now, you better figure that out, because time is slipping by every day." And so I think quality of life, what you want to do, how you want to enjoy your friends and spend your time are really important. And those times that Chris and Randy and all of us spend firing their kills or sailing or whatever, those are times that allow you to reflect on the fact that life's important. You have to do what you want that makes you happy. You have to enjoy it. There's lots of times when you go into the studio and it's a struggle. It's like, I got to make stuff today, and I got to walk out of here making stuff today. And I don't feel that sense of urgency anymore, where I did 15 years ago. And I think that maybe as a sense of caution is just be careful of that sense of urgency, because it will force you probably to do things that you might regret later on. That slow down a little bit. take time, honor your work, in a way that will sustain your making, your studio practice. So I'm taking that to heart, that advice that James Searles gave me, that the window's getting shorter, but the knowledge is getting greater. And how do you get that sense of knowledge into the work in a very important and poignant way that makes sense? How do you want the art world to view you once you're gone? And then, granted, there's a lot of people who start off early in life and they make, really great decisions, have great careers. Not all of them have sustained careers. And I want to be able to do this. And I joke about it. We probably all joke about it on some level, is that I'll just be face down in the wheel spinning one day and that'll be it, and but I do not want to do it falling off a ladder. So it has, age has caused me to, like most people say, is to think more seriously about every moment that you're in the studio. You can see some plates on the wall, which we can talk about in a minute. Well, that, Ben, is Mayelica painting on terracotta.
That's great.
Now, nobody really knows that is in me at all. But when I travel, such as to Mexico or Italy or wherever, I will do things in a way that create failure. But out of that failure comes success. And so I haven't lost that edge, that sense of intrigue. A good example, and it's poignant, but it's a good example, is I really encourage my students and everybody I talk to about this in terms of the studio practice, is stay curious. When Paul Solner was reaching the end of his life, I remember talking to him, and he was 93. I said, Paul, I'll help you. Let's go out in the shop and make some stuff. And he turned to me and he said, I'm not curious anymore. I've lost my sense of curiosity. And I think that's one thing that as an artist you cannot lose. You have to stay curious. You have to stay engaged with research. You have to keep your eyes open. And that sense of curiosity will carry you through your career. You may make a bunch of stuff that is kind of funny, maybe, but that sense of curiosity has led me now to other ways of thinking about surface decoration, form and shape, that I didn't have time for when I was working 80 hours a week. So create a healthy balance in your life between family, studio, research, travel, rest, all those things. Really important as you get older. And just know that the window is going, it's closing. Yeah. So stay curious is really the whole thing, is just stay curious. Don't lose that sense of curiosity. It doesn't matter where it takes you. Hell, if you want to go out and stack rocks in the backyard because you're curious about stacking rocks, then go do it. Don't wait for somebody to tell you that, yeah, you can go stack rocks in the backyard.
Well, speaking of stacking rocks, I feel like I saw a sculpture you made that was stacked fruit. Was it lemons?
Yes.
Yeah, let's talk about that sculpture, or that vein of sculpture, and where you're working on in the studio these days.
I've been a functionalist all my life on some level. That I was brought up that way. My father was a welder. My grandfather ran a salvage yard. Grew up around makers, people who would use their hands to make things. In that regard, we were all functionalists. We had to make things that had some function, And so I just have always enjoyed the fact that from my hands, an easy one for us all to understand, from my hands, I can make a mug that somebody can use on a daily basis and nourish themselves. That's functional. That's utility. I love that interaction, right? But I also like this idea that function and utility can come from something that causes you to consider values and priorities in your life. That's a really good painting, a really good piece of sculpture, brings a sense of joy or intrigue or curiosity. When you're given a little bit of time, one thing about kind of going into semi-retirement is you do have a little more time to say, okay, I don't think I need to make 100 mugs today. And maybe I'll do that another day. And so I had an assignment that I gave out to my seniors last semester. And it was a pretty simple assignment. It was create a centerpiece for the table in your home that reflects the conversation and the values that were going on around the table that you grew up at. Opened the door for people to actually get very frank and honest about things that were going on in their family and talk about those things, personal issues. And so one of the students turned to me and said, well, are you going to do it? So as a good teacher, when you give out a project, you've got to be willing to do it too. And so I said, sure, I'll do that. But building on this sense, and it kind of goes back to white Maiolica Italianate accoutrements, like on the either side of a fireplace or balusters or something like that. So I was kind of channeling those ideas. But the piece itself is rooted in the fact that around my table with 4 brothers and my dad, 5 boys and my mom, conversation was usually pretty sour.
Hence the lemons.
Lemons. And then there's some sticks in there because a lot of times conversation got to the point where, sticks and stones will break my bones. And so, developing those kind of analogies in your work, I think are important. How you can take an everyday object and then extend it into a metaphor about your life or a condition in life. That's where that all started. You can actually lift the lemons off and you have a big cake dish. So there's still a serving there, but then it goes in the center of the table. And I wanted it to be white because a good friend of mine, Sam Harvey, said, well, why not make them yellow? And I go, well, no, it's not about it being a lemon, right? It's about it being a lemon as an object and what that object stands for. So, and you also know that I work with metal and wood and build little reliques for objects on the landscape where I grew up. And I think that there's another good advice for students is don't go down a one-track road. Have little things that you can work on that keep your interest alive so that when you're back on track with what you want to focus on, that stuff is out of the way. And so when I sat down now to make cups and bowls and mugs, I'm now comfortable that if I have other narrative issues I want to talk about, I can take it into a different world, different realm. And that's pretty good advice, Have 2 or 3 things going on in your studio. Like Ken Price is a good example. Prints, paintings, drawings, cups, sculptures, plates, installation. Test your knowledge and intent by trying it in different arenas. And if it works in those different arenas, you're on to something. You then know that you have a voice that will carry through some different things. I recently saw some prints that Lisa Clegg was making. They are powerful, powerful prints building off of her sculpture. And I thought that's a perfect example of being able to test what you do in one arena to see if it can be successful in another arena. Over the years, you accumulate a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. Doesn't always have to go into that humble little cup.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Can you plug your website and then also how potential students could find out more about Oklahoma?
Yeah, sure. My website's really simple, just www.dougcasebeer.com. Go visit it. There's a gallery there that you can look at the work and keep up on what I'm doing. My resume is posted there as well. The University of Oklahoma, we're developing a stellar graduate program there. 3 faculty, myself, Stuart Asprey, and Jamie Bates Sloan, really excellent artists in their own right. And we all bring very different skills to this program. Wonderful support. A lot of people don't know this, but Frank Oma pottery, an indigenous pottery style from Oklahoma, was developed at the University of Oklahoma. And the University of Oklahoma's ceramics program next year will be 100 years old. It started in 1922. We're going to extend that legacy into greatness. We've gotten a lot of support. We're building wood kilns. Wingate's been very supportive of our programming. The Fred Jones Museum of Art, which is attached to the School of Art, has been rated as the 3rd best art museum in a university outside of Yale and Harvard. So come experience it. You know, it's a wonderful place. Oh, University of Oklahoma, just U of Oklahoma Ceramics, Sooner Ceramics, Red Clay Faction, all that'll get you to our programs.
Well, man, it was good to see you today. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Oh, my pleasure, Ben. It's just been wonderful reconnecting with you. And I just want to say from my heart how proud I am of you and what you do for our field.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank Doug for coming on the show. It was so nice to connect with him, and it also meant a lot at the end there that he said he was proud of me. It's funny how certain people get into your mind. When I was in graduate school, I used to dream that he would come into my studio and he would knock my pots on the floor, and he would tell me that I was not working hard enough. So he has occupied this space in my psyche where he is a mentor and a friend, but he also was this voice, or representing this voice in my head that I needed to just keep working. And I think you heard that in the interview today, that resiliency, that pace of work and change over a long amount of time has been a key success for him, and it's also something that was instilled into me. So a pleasure to catch up with him, and always nice to hear someone who has had such a long experience talk about their career in clay. Before we go, I wanted to do today's Amoco Community Corkboard, which is in support of the Canon River Clay Tour. This is happening August the 21st and 22nd, and it is in person this year. You can find out more information, including who's participating and what the stops on the tour are, by going to CanonRiverClayTour.com. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.